without further delay. So good morning again. My name is Robert Hawkins. I am the MLA for Yellowknife Centre. I'm also the chair of the Economic Development and Environment Committee. Today we're joined by the Honourable Minister of Infrastructure, Caroline Wozniak, and the department officials to receive a briefing on marine transportation services, so sometimes referred to as MTS. Please note that this meeting is being live streamed through the Assembly's social media channels, and maybe for the sake of time, I'm going to introduce the MLAs. So on my left, we have Danny McNeely. He's the MLA for Leasot 2. Online, we have Ms. Gabriel, MLA for Great Slave, Julian Morris, MLA for Frame Lake, and George Narasu joining us from Mackenzie Delta, MLA for the Mackenzie Delta. Committee staff, our clerk is Ms. Weaver Charpentier, and our advisor is Mr. Arjit Sidhu. I would like to remind committee members that our witnesses will direct all questions through myself as the chair. Now, those online, maybe we'll figure out how to do that in a seamless or maybe less bumpy way, with a few bumps here and there, but we'll do our best. I'll now pass the microphone on to the Minister, and if you could introduce your staff, and at that point, feel free to proceed into the presentation, and then we'll go from there. So, with your opening remarks, and we'll follow along online with the actual presentation. Okay, thank you. Please, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, committee. Good morning, MLAs. And thank you to committee for inviting us here today. I am here to provide a briefing on Marine Transportation Services, or MTS, and the planning for the upcoming barge resupply season. With committee's permission, I'm going to begin by providing this update on Marine Transportation Services governance review, which is underway. But first, I will start with some introductions. From the Department of Infrastructure, on my right is Ms. Tracy St. Denis, Assistant Deputy Minister of Programs and Services. On my left, Mr. Kyle Iru, Director of Marine Transportation Governance and Strategic Planning. Also in the room with us this morning, I have Ms. Jennifer Lucas, Senior Advisor to the Deputy Minister of Infrastructure, and Mr. Drew Robertson, my Ministerial Special Advisor. As you may recall from my minister's statement during the last sitting of the House, MTS's work during the 2023 season was extremely challenging. Historic low water on the Mackenzie River and 2 evacuations of the town of Hay River due to the wildfires meant that MTS and the Fuel Services Division staff were making decisions prior to and throughout the season based on rapidly changing conditions. Given these decisions and the contingency planning undertaken by MTS and Fuel Services staff, MTS was able to complete the planned deliveries with the exception of one final cargo barge to Toledo and Norman Wells, which we acknowledge did have negative impacts on residents, businesses, and on the community and Indigenous governments of the region. Contingency plans, however, came at a price and contributed to the need for a significant supplementary appropriation for MTS, which was reviewed by committee of the whole last month. We will cover in more detail in the presentation the risks associated with MTS operations and the volatility of MTS revenues and costs, which led the previous government to undertake a governance and operational review at MTS. This review includes financial and operational analysis of MTS and Fuel Services Division, as well as an assessment of the governance model being used for MTS. The review is being completed by an independent third party with business advisory experience and marine industry experience. And the review, I am pleased to say, is nearing conclusion. I will look forward to sharing the report with committee for review and feedback as soon as it's complete. We anticipate that will be complete and reviewed by Cabinet by the summer of 2024. Finally, as requested by committee, our briefing today will include contingency planning that is underway for the 2024 season, including how we are planning to adapt to the continued low water levels and to continued increased wildfire risk. Thank you, Mr. Chair. With that, we will begin the briefing, and I'll turn it first to Ms. St. Denis, please.
Thank you, Minister. Ms. St. Denis, if you want to lead us through the presentation, my understanding is all members have copies, so we probably are okay with, and it's not that many, so we'll just follow along. If you feel the need to let us know what page you're on, that'll be fine too, but otherwise we should be fine. Please.
Chair. The intention of the presentation today is to give, as the Minister mentioned, a bit of an update on where the organization is, we thought we would start off with a very brief history of what MTS is, a little bit of an overview of the program itself, and then get into the 2023 season that we just had, which is really helping us inform our approach to 2024. I'll then hand it over to my colleague Kyle Rue to walk through the remainder of the presentation on spill response and our governance review. A bit of a history of marine service in the territory that committee may not be aware of. The organization was actually founded several years ago as a Crown corporation. Canada then sold MTS to the Inuvialuit Development Corporation in Nunisi. Members will be aware that NTCL, Northern Transportation Limited, did file for creditor protection in 2016 and then ended up ceasing operations that year. The GNWT did acquire MTS through bankruptcy proceedings and did acquire the asset in December of that year. Obviously, the goal of the GNWT in acquiring MTS was to ensure that the specialized equipment and the specialized services of providing fuel and essential goods supply to the communities was maintained, even with that bankruptcy proceeding. The next slide is a bit of an overview of the MTS program itself. For those folks that have had the chance to actually see our operations both in Hay River, Inuvik, and Tuk, we do have administration, which is the management, procurement, and finance areas of the organization. We've got a fleet of 8 high-powered shallow draft tugs, which we'll talk a little bit more about, doing business obviously down the Mackenzie River and then up into the Inuvialuit settlement regions, and then we do have some deliveries to a community in Nunavut's Kitikmeot region. So we do have scheduled services to approximately 11 northern communities. We have 3 terminals, as I've mentioned, Hay River, Tuktoyaktuk, and Inuvik. 6 mainline tugs, which do the vast majority of our work. And then we have a harbor tug called the Kakiza that I'll talk a little bit more about. It is a smaller vessel that's assisting us with some of our mitigation work from last year and into next year. We do have 35 barges to provide the movement of fuel and as well as deck cargo. And then we have a series of double hull barges that help us move fuel. And the shipyard actually is unique in that it's the only shipyard north of 60. It has a large synchro lift that allows us to actually move vessels out of the water into our shipyard and into our maintenance facility. This allows us to do dry docking not only of our vessels, but as well as the Coast Guard. The next slide speaks to the essential resupply that we do for a variety of communities. The primary product that we move obviously is fuel, roughly 23 million liters last year. With that, we also provide an opportunity for customers to have deck cargo provided to a variety of communities. We have the Inuvialuit settlement region provide fuel and cargo to Sax Harbor, Olawaktuk, Paulatuk, and Tuktoyaktuk. And then, of course, along the Mackenzie River, Norman Wells, Toledo, Kashokotney, Inuvik, and Aklavik. And then on the Great Slave Lake, we do deliveries to Little Cay. We also do deliveries on Great Slave Lake when asked by clients in the tourism sector as well as the federal government when they're doing some resupplies. And then finally, we do have a North Warning system, a federal charter that we do, which helps resupply the North Warning systems in a variety of locations across the north. So after that overview of the business of MTS, I thought it would be a good opportunity to share with committee the lived experience of 2023. The next slide, which is the 2023 season. talks about the beginning of the season. And the picture we were hoping to paint today was that a year ago, because of weather conditions and some delays in starting the season, we had a variety of vessels that were in different parts of the north. So wanted to just explain to committee that by actually having these vessels not where they were originally intended to be, did add some additional challenges for the team. Overwintering vessels is not unusual. That will happen in Tuk and Inuvik and in Hay River. But really, just wanted to kind of paint the picture that this caused additional challenges at the beginning of last year. On top of that, the 2-week evacuation of Hay River, and then, of course, low water, and then subsequently the 5 weeks evacuation that we had later in the season. Anyway, moving on to the next slide, wanted to just talk about some of the things, knowing that the organization started off with challenges literally before ice and snow had melted. The team was very quickly looking to mitigation steps. You know, what could we do in order to be ready for the 2023 season? One of the things that was decided is, depending on how we load the barges can be lightened in order to reduce their draft, which means when they're moving through the water, they can actually move through the river with reduced water amounts or river levels. In the spring, we realized that there could be challenges with the length of our season. We do know that having water at the beginning of the season is operationally allows us to move fuel and goods. But what we decided to do was move a portion of the fuel over the top, which means we had fuel delivered from Cherry Point Refinery out of Western Washington State on the west coast, and brought over the top up to Tuk, where we actually did fuel lightering and the movement of fuel onto our barges. That meant roughly 10 million liters were moved over the top, and then 7 million liters were moved along the river to the communities, Norman Wells and south, and then onto Great Slave Lake. This mitigation allowed us to get the fuel to ISR. Speaking of ISR, we also knew that there could be challenges with the cargo that was in Hay River with low water. So the team wanted to ensure that cargo was met with the fuel, with the timing, that together then the fuel and cargo could be then transported to the Inuvialuit settlement region. With that, we moved approximately 33 trucks worth of goods through the Dempster up to Tuk in order to meet up with those barges. And I know 2022 was a challenging season with weather and the non-supply to Sachs Harbor. Very pleased that this year, with the constant communication with the mayors and leadership, that we did have a successful ISR delivery this year. Unfortunately, as I mentioned, with the evacuation, not only in the spring, but more importantly at the end of the season, Hay River was evacuated for 5 weeks. We had successfully done 3 out of 4 tows to Norman Wells and 2 out of 3 tows to Toledo. The last tow that was going to both Toledo and Norman Wells, we were unable to actually finish the season off with that one last tow due to the evacuation. Obviously disappointing for the team because everyone had worked really hard to try and find a variety of mitigating steps, but unfortunately the wildfire and the evacuation caused that situation. Because of the cancellation, we did arrange to fly some priority grocery items to Norman Wells, and we did arrange to work with clients about moving some of that freight from Hay River to Norman Wells over the Winter Road. I had the pleasure of actually driving that Winter Road last week, and very pleased with the team and the regional operations and the contractors with the state of that highway. And then, of course, we do have some customers that are arranging for some of their goods to come this summer. So, we did add tows to last season's operation because of the reduced draft and having to use more barges. But we did accommodate that additional cargo with the reduced draft. Moving on to the next slide, moving into the 2024 season, many of the steps that we took in 2023 to do the mitigation, we are looking to repeat. We're looking to continue some proactive mitigation because we are all aware that low water is a reality for our territory this season. So we are actually actively working with our colleagues and getting updates from the Department of the Environment on that. But just wanted to review with committee in a little bit more detail on what the planning that's been underway this winter to get ready for 2024. One of our critical partners is the Canadian Coast Guard. Not only do we do work in the shipyard on their vessels so that they can be prepared for the season, more importantly, they are instrumental in having the navigational aids for the buoys placed on the river. They are aware, we are aware that there were a series of buoys that were left on the river last season. Very pleased that the Coast Guard has taken steps to acquire new buoys, and those new buoys will be put out so that we can get out as soon as possible. So they've been an excellent partner to work with. As well, would like to also commend the partnership with Transport Canada. They have been extremely cooperative on helping us with any supports we need as it relates to getting our fleet ready to go this season. We have a sailing plan that's being developed, and of course it's being based on cargo loads that we are expecting to get. We're also working on cutoff dates or cargo drop-off dates. We are going to be doing some communications, and we have reached out to some key clients. We are looking to bump those dates up. Historically, we stagger the dates, but in order to have everything ready to go, we are going to be asking people to have their cargo delivered a bit earlier. And the idea is to have the barges ready to go and sail as soon as we can, i.e. when the water's clear of ice and we've got the buoys out with Coast Guard. Wanted to just share that the team has also been busy in the shipyard getting our assets ready so that winter work can be completed. Some work was being done in the Vic Ingram and the Edward K. Again, making sure that we've got the fleet ready to go as soon as we can to get fuel moving. The plan is to have the fleet mobilized and ready to go mid-June, and the shipyard is actually attempting to get the fleet ready in advance of that. I mentioned that we're working very closely with the Coast Guard. We're doing work on their vessels and they're doing work at the same time, so the plan is to kind of work in tandem. It really is imperative that we take advantage of the higher water in the season. Last year, water levels started impacting our operation on the river kind of mid-August. So really, we want to be able to get out mid-June and get our cargo deliveries done well in advance of that date. Wanted to flag Imperial Oil in Northern Wells. Committee members would have remembered that part of the last tow. The only and one last tow that we were not able to do last year, there was some aviation fuel on that. We worked very proactively with Imperial, and very pleased to say that the last of that aviation gas, or that aviation fuel, is actually being delivered towards the end of this week. Anyway, I just wanted to flag that the actual first two tows for MTS will actually be delivering fuel and some cargo to Northern Wells. So wanted to just highlight that for the committee. And then as well, as I mentioned last year, the over-the-top, bringing fuel in from Cherry Point Refinery. One thing I forgot to mention last year with the Cherry Point Fuel Refinery is as our fuel was leaving the refinery, it experienced a fire. So with the variety of challenges we had, I just wanted to add that even with that challenge of the fuel leaving a little later than planned, the team was able to regain some of that time. When the tanker actually arrives over the top, fuel lightering or fuel transferring from the freighter happens in a safe harbor, usually Wise Bay, where we actually transfer fuel from the tanker into the barges. Anyway, we are doing that same step again this year, where we're having a north-south operation, so we can ensure we've got fuel, and we'll be bringing cargo up down the river in order to again have a successful ISR delivery. And we will be keeping up communications with leadership on that as well, like we did last year, looking at doing again roughly 7 million liters out of Hay River and then 10 million liters out the top.
Do you need a second? You said, yes, you're doing fine. I don't feel you have to rush.
I didn't think I sound probably, but thank you for the feedback. Thanks. Oh, okay. So the concept of fuel lightering, we are repeating the approach that we did last season, which is having fuel move, yes, out of Hay River, and yes, over the top for our ISR communities. And as mentioned, roughly 10 million liters over the top, and then 7 million liters through Hay River. So that kind of gives the committee a bit of an approach that we're taking to have mitigation steps in place. We're going to then get into commercial clients and harbor restoration, so I'm actually going to hand it over to my colleague Kyle Arrow on that one.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. St-Denis. I've got it. And our staff. So now, Mr. Is it Rue? Arrow. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning, committee. Good morning, Mr. Chair. Good morning, MLAs. In addition to our community deliveries, MTS will be doing work for 2 commercial clients in 2024, so I'll speak briefly about those projects. The first is for our client is Propac. They're an Alberta-based manufacturer of oil and gas equipment. We are transporting 8 barge loads of their cargo from Hay River to Tuktoyaktuk. It will then be taken by a third party from Tuktoyaktuk to the North Slope of Alaska. I think it's important to reiterate that our priority at MTS is, of course, community deliveries. This commercial work is taken when MTS has excess capacity. So in the case of the Propac contract, the assets that are being used to facilitate that project or dedicated resources are not needed for any of the community deliveries. And in addition, the Propac contract, MTS's obligation to provide those assets to the client is made subject to our priority in completing the community deliveries. So if we had to take assets off that project, which we don't foresee having to do, we nevertheless have the ability in the contract to do so. We're taking the work with Santos Propac because it represents a significant profit to MTS, which then, of course, subsidizes our operations elsewhere. The other contract, which is a long-term contract, we're in year 4 of 5 this year, is with Crawley, and this is to move fuel to the North Warning sites, which my colleague mentioned earlier. It's a lightering job, so Crawley brings in a fuel tanker to the Herschel Island area. MTS equipment that offloads the fuel from that tanker and delivers it to the North Warning sites across the Arctic. So those are the 2 commercial projects that are upcoming for 2024. I'll also speak briefly about harbor restoration. This is the dredging project at Hay River that is carrying over from last year. It's the Design and Technical Services Division of Infrastructure which is leading the project, but MTS is involved because we are providing a tug and 6 barges to help facilitate that project. Last year it was the Kikiza, which is our harbor tug, that was being used, and the Keys is required for harbor operations, and it was being used for dredging as well. So there's a significant demand on the Keys this year to improve efficiency. We've brought in an additional tug for the dredging operations, so the Keys will be dedicated to MTS harbor operations, and then an additional tug will be dedicated to the dredging operations. Dredging is scheduled to begin in early June. I think the date that is targeted is June 3rd, and it will continue on until the middle of September. So I'll move to the next slide, which is spill response. I know there was a question from the committee on what MTS's spill response is, so I'll speak to that. There's really two separate regimes. For the land-based side of MTS's operation, which would be our terminals, primarily our terminals in the shipyard, we have the fuel spill prevention and contingency plan, which is the one that was referenced in the committee's letter. So that plan speaks to a variety of things, spill containment, key contacts, how to store fuel products. It's posted in public places of our land-based facilities. It has been updated as recently as 2020, I believe. The only updates made from the 2019 version were just updating key contacts. Some staff had left, and we had to update who to call in the event of a spill. The other part of the spill-based regime is for the vessels. MTS is, like any shipping company in Canada, federally regulated by Transport Canada and subject to Canada Shipping Act. That act requires vessels to have a spill plan that is specific to that vessel. All the plans are different for all of our vessels depending on their size and crew complement and so on. And vessels are required to carry spill kits, which include things like floating oil booms. And the crew are trained each year in spill response, similar to how Transport Canada requires regular man overboard drills. It also requires regular spill response training. So that's part of the training that happens every year in MTS. And for the water-based spills, there's a different regime, which is the shipboard oil pollution emergency response plan, which all vessels have to carry. So I think what I'll do now is switch into the governance review, which are the final two slides of the presentation. The governance review found its start last year. There was a direction to conduct a review of the governance model options for MTS. So in the spring of last year, in May 2023, a request for proposals went out. And fundamentally the ask was of the proponents was to conduct a review of the current kind of government program, and then to provide some insight on what other options or governance models could look like, such as a crown corporation, a private operator model, full privatization, kind of really the spectrum of governance options for MTS. KPMG, management consulting and auditing firm, was the successful proponent, and they were contracted in September of 2023. And if I'm just moving to the next slide, I'll speak to what KPMG is doing and what they've been doing since being hired in September. Their kind of project or their focus is really three separate phases. The first is what we're calling the current state analysis, which is KPMG spent quite a long time in the fall and early in the new year really understanding what MTS is, conducted a series of interviews with the key players at MTS and those with knowledge of the organization to understand what the current state of the program is, and that includes analyzing financial and all of the operational data associated with the program. That stage of the process is complete. The second stage of what KPMG has been doing is an alternative model assessment. So effectively looking at what the different models could be here. So they've they've provided a whole spectrum of options, which range from a government program, effectively the status quo, right through to full privatization. But in the middle, there's government agencies and crown corporations, and private operator type model. That stage is also now almost complete, subject to a few small outstanding items. And then the final part of their analysis, which is what's ongoing now, is to kind of merge the current state with these different models and say this model would look like this, given what we know about the state of MTS, and this model would look like this, and then ultimately providing some recommendations to the department on what models will be most efficient or best suit MTS. So in terms of next steps, we expect KPMG's report to be finalized in the summer. As the Minister indicated earlier, that report will be shared with this committee and proceed from there. So I guess thank you very much. I think we'll turn it over to the committee for whatever questions they have.
Thank you. All right, we're at question time. So what I'll do is maybe I'll start off with Mr. McNeely with some questions. And I was remiss. Thank you for both your opening comments and your presentation. Mr. McNeely, did you want to lead us off with the beginning? And then what I'll do is for those online, which I'll just run through the names one at a time and give people a heads up in the order we'll proceed in. And that way folks can queue in a more organized way, maybe, in that fashion. And I should also mention Mr. Danny Rogers, MLA for Blue Lake, has joined us. I believe it was at the start of the presentation, just as we kicked it off. So he's in full attendance. So that said, I'll go to Mr. McNeely first with some questions, and then I'll create a list and work through members online. All right. Mics are live with staff, so they've got. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks, Minister and staff, for the briefing. And it's to me it adds comfort to our remote areas. You know, we depend solely on the barging season, and we hear things which affects our projects moving ahead. But having seen the Vic Ingram last year in August, it was really a surprising moment for me, because when I was talking to the deckhand had told me that 12 miles upstream from the community of Toledo, there's a rock ridge that goes across, and the Vic Ingram, as you know, is the biggest boat you have. And that was designed for the ocean, the Arctic Ocean, and during the time of Dow Petroleum and the exploration out there, and the PIP grants that finance these projects. But anyways, this boat was pushing 1.8 million liters of fuel destined for Toledo, and it bottomed out, punctured a hole in the tub. So I assume that would be recertified and repaired to make it compliant with federal Transport Canada guidelines in preparation for this sailing season. So the spill plan you have, or should have, and must have to be compliant with federal regulations is really in question. And I'm kind of thinking at the time, it's a good thing that the barge didn't bottom out. What if the barge bottomed out? I don't know whether it's a double hull barge or a single, but you would have had a spill of 1.3 million liters of fuel. So that's just a near-miss red flag notice. And another notice, which adds to the merit of your sailing season and the quality and the dependability of your sailing season, to ensure delivery when whether it's a commercial project or even your own projects in some of these communities. As you know, there's a health center going on in Toledo, and there's other commercial projects going on in Northern Wales, being an industrial one and so on. So there's a young guy there. He was out caribou, or he was out hunting there at Little Chicago, 90 miles downstream from Fort Good Hope, and he tells me that this tugboat really acted strange. It was pivoting back and forth and so on. So we stopped at the shore and shut his motor off to listen and watch this tugboat. It was actually stuck, but not stuck as bad as the ones in Fort Providence. He pivoted and got out of there, but this young fellow was telling me there was just mud and sandy water, muddy water, just splashing out of the back end. So that's another near miss. So you had two tugs there that also bottomed out there in Fort Providence. And the third boat had to come and pull those guys out. And I think the assistant deputy minister is right here. You had these Coast Guard vessels that were in fear of bottoming out and maybe even having to winter there. So they left all the buoys and all the markers in Mackenzie. So we picked up on that, we being local people, and now we're just red flagging that dependability on your sailing season is very important. And also, the safety compliance of your vessels. Are they all certified now? Is fire extinguishers being checked? Is the galley checked? So, there's a lot of checks and balances to make sure that we are providing service and recognizing the potential of low water season. We already had one, so we have that experience, and we can't deny that experience. We had to, when I say we, it's a GNWT, I'm part of that. We had to charter a Hercules to deliver 2 generators, one to Fort Good Hope and one to Toledo. I don't know the price tag of that, but I hear it's about $220,000. So that's one house for somebody. And then you had to fly in some fuel there effective June or January the 8th, as the assistant deputy minister said, you ran short of fuel. So the domestic scheduled flights depend on that, as well as commercial and so on. So you had to fly that in, 8 bladders, or 3, I'm told, 3 bladders, 18,000 liters each, to tie you over till the big trucks could come in and deliver at $1.75 per liter. Now, the consumption of our gas stations in the 4 communities of the Sahtu, being Delaney, Colville, and Fort Good Hope, and Toledo, we consume in the neighborhood of 6 million liters. Now, what if we don't have a marketing season? How is that resupply going to happen? At what cost? I read the fact of even thinking about that. But so I just share some of the concerns that I have, and I value your presentation and recognize that you're having an updated sailing schedule. I look forward to getting a copy of that. And in stock now, maybe, excuse me, after the winter road resupply is done here towards the end of this month, if we can get the delivery report. How much fuel was delivered last year? I understand 1.8 went to Toledo, some went to Northern Wales. 600,000 liters came from over the top upstream to deliver Fort Good Hope to the winter road. That information, if we can get last year's information and this year's winter road delivery, then we can say, okay, well, come June, we're starting off at this level, and our margin resupply is going to be X. So at the end of the season, we can say, okay, well, we have consumed and we have delivered this amount. So I look forward to getting those 2 pieces there. And I guess my question is, is really keeping us up to date as we draw nearer to this potential water season. I've circulated numerous information on what happened last year and what could, and we hope not, going to happen this year. When I hear stories of a fellow from here at the gas station telling me that the rubble in fall time, when it freezes along the lakeshore, it pushes up the brush along a level. That level compared to the ice level now is a difference of 6 feet in Great Slave Lake here. And we know the large body there, so if that's down 6 feet, one could only imagine what is our current water levels, and I understand it's below normal. So a red flag for all the proceedings that we're going to be moving towards. And it's a we approach. It's our government assets, and the more information we can share, the more secure we feel in summer deliveries. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McNeely. Go to the minister. There was some questions in there, and certainly some observations by any means, and practical ones. Minister, if you had a comment and able to take a stab at some of the questions and requests. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. There was quite a few questions and quite a few comments. I suppose what I'll start off with, and I'll then turn through the chair to Deputy Minister, Assistant Deputy Minister. But I want to start off with around the communications and ensuring that it's very clear that I'm quite prepared to make a commitment that we'll have good communications. So I know I have been requesting, for example, through the winter season, updates about the winter road resupply. And those come to me regularly, and I've tried to certainly share them with community members and MLAs as appropriate to the individual communities, just to make sure people have that sense of comfort. Because there's certainly no benefit to anybody if word gets out that there's a delay and then people start to change their buying behaviors or become concerned. That doesn't benefit anybody. And so the more we can demonstrate that what our targets are and where we are in terms of meeting them, again, that benefits everyone. So I'm more than happy to say that be a commitment, and that we'll get that information to MLAs who are, I find, a pretty critical resource in terms of their connection to their community. So that's that. I'll start with that. And similarly, with respect to an understanding, I think we ran through during the presentation fairly quickly what was completed as of October of 2023 for the resupply, but we can put that in writing just to make sure that that's a little easier to take than just hearing the numbers here. And similarly, once the full winter resupply is done, we can more than happy to make sure that those numbers are added to it. So that exactly as it said, that maybe our first communications for the summer sailing season is where we're starting from, including in it, what items people may be requesting still from last year that didn't make it through. And then we can all start from the same starting point in June, with, at that point, also then by then knowing what the plan is in terms of where we're going to, which community, at which date. And I think last comment, Mr. Chair, before I do turn it over, if I may, would be that I think we have already, I think even just maybe earlier this week, started to get information out to MLAs and to communities directly about some of our intended timelines. So again, as the Deputy Minister mentioned, we are hoping that clients who have their own commercial cargo services on MTS can get their materials to us a little sooner, so that there's absolutely no delay. The minute we get it on the water, we get it on the water. But I think there was a few other comments, and so I do, if I may, Mr. Chair, turn it over to the ADM.
Okay. Thank you, Minister. Assistant Deputy Minister, same thing, please.
Mr. Chair, noted the points that the MLA mentioned about the low water, and absolutely agree. The team is focusing all efforts on taking advantage of the higher water in the beginning of the season to avoid the movement of vessels, as we mentioned, kind of mid-August. We're fortunate that our captains, it really is the knowledge of the river, so we're fortunate that we've got captains that have several years' experience. We've, as I mentioned, reduced and actually plan to further reduce this year. Last year we did 5 feet. This year we're going to do 4 feet draft. We're actually going to use more barges and actually have the barges even lighter this year as part of the mitigation. Ensuring delivery is agree with the MLA, absolutely critical. I'm actually had the chance to actually be at NWT Association of Communities with our manager of cargo to do roundtable discussions with the leadership from all the communities to talk about, what some of the challenges were last year and where we're going next year. And agree with the MLA that it's important for communities to understand what our plan is. And actually, I've been invited to the Sawtooth Summit that the town of Hay River is doing next week, so we'll be able to further share what our plans are. And just wanted to flag that the Coast Guard again is really shares the strategy about needing to get out soon with those buoys, which are navigation aids on the river. And further to the minister's commitment, we'll ensure that the minister's got that information to share with standing committee. And then I'll just ask Mr. Arrow if there's anything else he wanted to add. But it really is about taking advantage of the higher water at the beginning of the season and the schedule being built around getting deliveries done earlier this year. But, over to Mr. Arrow in case there's anything he wanted to add. Oh.
No problem. It's because we're recording, of course. Deputy Minister Eru? Eru.
But yes, thank you. Well, I can only hope. I guess just yes, one small comment. Thank you, Emily McNeely, for your questions. Just relating to the certification of our tugs and barges. All of our barges are, the technical term is classed, but that's effectively, it means certified by a classification society. So Transport Canada has delegated certain regulatory functions to third parties. In our case, Lloyd's Register, which is a large international classification society. So all of our barges are classed, or all of our barges that carry fuel, I should say, are classed. So the barges you're referring to are classed and inspected and not allowed to sail unless classed. And our tugs are certified directly by Transport Canada. Same applies. They're inspected regularly, and if Transport Canada isn't satisfied with their condition, they don't sail. And I share your concern that priority number one is preventing a spill. That is absolutely the worst case scenario. No one wants to see a spill.
Thank you, Director. Sorry about that. Okay, I am now, just before I proceed back to Mr. McNeely for a follow-up, and then I'm going to work my way through the list. As mentioned, I said I would give advance notice to those online, the members. Now, the order I will proceed in will be Mr. Morris, Mr. Narasu, Ms. Reed, and Mr. Rogers. Mr. Narasu, I believe, is joining by a phone as opposed to, say, the normal computer stuff. I'm not sure if that's normal per se, but I believe he'll be emailing his questions in. I think he's having audio trouble. I think he can hear us, but I don't think he can call us. So we'll proceed in that order. As I mentioned, Mr. Morris, Mr. Narasu, Ms. Reed, and then Mr. Rogers if he has any questions, and of course we'll work our way around. So I'll go to Mr. McNeely now for his next question, and then we'll proceed to the other members after the team has had a chance to comment.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I have a couple of questions. I'll save one for after giving some opportunity for the other colleagues. I imagine Julian is in Japan now. He wants to get to bed here, so we'll have to put him on the list here. But my first two questions is when is the plan to restore the Hay River rail link between Enterprise and Hay River? That's an important link to bring our fuel cars into the community of, or into the terminal area of Hay River. Thank you.
Thank you. Just waiting to find out if you would like the question. Minister, thank you. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the question. So just for anyone maybe listening who may not be aware, CN Rail's rail link between, firstly, up through Alberta to Enterprise and then from Enterprise to Hay River did sustain some significant damage, of course, as a result of the wildfires in 2023. They did take, I think I can classify it as fairly swift action to repair the link between Alberta to Enterprise in the fall. And that was done by CN Rail. But the portion from Enterprise to Hay River, that remaining, I want to say 30 miles, but I could be off, that portion was not completed in the fall, and 10 miles. We had been, at that time, told that that would be something that would be planned for the summer. I don't know if that is still CN Rail's plan. I don't know exactly what they may or may not be planning to do as a result of some conversations we were having with them. So those conversations are ongoing. I am hopeful that we will see the rail line repaired. I don't have a date, but I do want to assure the committee that we are in contact with CN Rail about that portion of the line, and that we'll continue to be in contact with CN Rail about that portion of the line. And I believe at the end of TAC, we started to have some correspondence and communications directly with communities and Indigenous governments who are also dependent on the CN Rail line for the resupply, so that everyone is in the same conversations that I am aware of this information that we have, so that there can be a unified response ultimately. Thank you.
All right. Maybe what I'll do is I'll proceed around to members and come back to Mr. McNeil on that point, but maybe I'll just make a reference specific to it is if any information you can pass on with respect to timing and communication with them to committee, that would be very helpful because it sounds like the whole system is contingent on that link. That said, we'll come back to it. I'll give Mr. McNeil or anyone else a chance. That said, I'm going to proceed. If Mr. Morris can hear me, maybe if you can just first check in. Oh, there he is. All right. Mr. Morris, I'll say good morning to you. I think it's approaching 1 a.m. your time, so I'll let you proceed when you're ready.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thanks to everyone for the presentation. Nice to see you from the other side of the world. I don't really have any specific questions, honestly. I appreciated the presentation and the information, and certainly am looking forward to the conclusion of the governance and operational review. I think that'll be a time to dig into MTS a little bit more, and that may kind of trigger another briefing for the committee. So for now, I'll just say thank you, and that's it for me.
Thank you, Mr. Morris. So not hearing a specific question there, I'm going to, and not seeing any eagerness to jump in from the minister's side, I'll proceed to a comment or a question from Mr. Narasu, who's emailed it in. So first, thank you, Mr. Narasu, for working through this. Unfortunately, our regular logistical services aren't working, but we've got you. So his question, Mr. Narasu's specific question is, how is Klavik and Sigachik being serviced? And that's his question to the minister. To the Assistant Deputy Minister Sanctity, please, if you could. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The fuel services for Klavik are actually handled by a private entity, but MTS does make arrangements to move deck cargo, and that will be moved through our barges this summer. So just clarification for the MLA about what our role is. We may end up helping out that private operator, that private fuel provider. But yes, absolutely, the Klavik is on the plan for this year. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll wait for a follow-up from Mr. Narasu if he wants to, just given the sort of timing and response of emails, internet, and connections, etc. So that said, I'll move to Ms. Reid. It looks like she's joined us in the context of live. She was listening all along, obviously, but I see Ms. Reid there now on the screen. Ms. Reid, if you would proceed, and then we'll see where we go. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the Minister and her department for the briefing. Much appreciated. Like Mr. Morse, I am very interested in seeing more about the review of the governance structure. But my one main question today, I think, would focus mainly on what modeling and what preparatory work in terms of trying to predict, although I know it's very difficult to predict, the water levels through the system that MTS utilizes. I know you have mentioned that you're working with ECC on tracking water levels for the season. I assume in part due to inter or transboundary waters and measuring coming into the Hay River and beyond into Great Slave and up through Mackenzie. I'm just curious if you can dive a little deeper into how you're measuring water levels for this year and future years. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Reid. And just before we proceed to the minister, we're getting a lot of feedback, I suspect, from your end. I'm not sure if there's anything you can do about it, but I just thought to mention it. So I'll go to the Assistant Deputy Minister for the answer to your question. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the MLA for the question. As recently as the week before last, received a presentation from the hydrology unit with the Department of Environment and Climate Change. They've been a great resource this winter about helping plain language and better understand how the different watersheds actually feed into Great Slave Lake and then, of course, then impact the Mackenzie River. They have been providing their bulletins, and they have been discussing with us the different data sets and the data points that they do have along the river and along Great Slave Lake. I think at this point, again, this is my plain language understanding of a very scientific world. There are some challenges always with modeling. They are doing their best to do some forecasting and assisting us, which is why we've decided, rather than doing a normal 5-foot draft, we're actually moving to a 4-foot in order to accommodate what those water levels may be. I am pleased to say that I got an email yesterday indicating that Hay River did get 8 to 10 inches of snow. So we will be very closely watching precipitation not only in the Southern Territory, but as well watching Alberta and the snowpack in BC, which I realize the scientists look at a variety of data sets. At this point, we'll continue to get updates from that unit. It'll be key information for us as we move forward. So thank you to the member for the question. Absolutely on our mind as far as watching water. Thank you.
Thank you, Assistant Deputy Minister. I'll just check if Ms. Reid has a further question and if she wants to come back online with respect to that. But in the interim, I'll ask Mr. Narasu's follow-up. And Mr. Narasu was concerned about his communities in the Mackenzie Delta, so again, the same theme. His follow-up question to me was, or to you technically, is Sigachik having their fuel trucked from Inuvik? So is that part of the MTS coordination of fuel delivery in the communities? I'm seeing head shaking referencing the phrase no, but if the minister wants to put that on the record, or if she's aware how Sigachik will get their fuel, who do they coordinate with specifically, if the minister is familiar with that? If she can elaborate in some form, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Chair, I can say that the fuel resupply to Sigachik comes by road. It's not done through MTS. What I could do is go out and just maybe get a bit more information. I can convey that directly to committee or obviously to Emily Narasu. I don't have anything further on that because it's not coming up. But I'll make sure we get that information, whatever we can get to committee.
Thank you. If you could flesh it out and send it to committee, and then we'll take it from there. If the member has further concerns, he can either take it directly to you or bring it back to committee for committee to assist. So that's fine. I believe my note now says Ms. Reid has no further questions, so that's fine, but she's still listening along. I'm going to go to Mr. Rogers in Inuvik if he has any questions.
Hey, good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair. You guys can hear me okay?
Crystal.
Perfect. So thanks for the update. I apologize for being a little late this morning. The internet in my office was not cooperating, so I had to come back home, which is okay. So given, and I know you said KPMG are doing a kind of a review of the operations, And given the low waters, I mean, the low waters continue to be an issue. Is there any, I guess, discussion or as part of either that review by KPMG or a discussion as part of what the department is doing as to maybe looking at Inuvik being kind of the area that can service the coastal communities and the delta communities? I understand that it will be difficult to move everything upriver. I think Fort Good Hope was kind of the choke point with the ramparts being super low in there most years, these years. Is there any I guess thought given to that, to having Inuvik as being the base for the coastal communities and the delta communities?
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. I'm just waiting for a volunteer. Director, please, if you would.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the MLA for the question. That's not the core mandate of KPMG's review. KPMG's review is focused really on the governance models, but they have been, to their credit, asking lots of questions, and this is something that is, always kind of on the minds of MTS staff, is how can we gain efficiency, and that's something that has been discussed internally, and KPMG are aware that, for example, last year with low water, where the ramparts became non-navigable, the fleet effectively got split into two. So it's something that's on our minds. There's no concrete plans at this stage to kind of permanently split the fleet into two, but it's something that is on our minds. We're aware of, yes.
Thank you, Director. Any? Nope. Assistant Deputy Minister, you had some further to that comment.
Chair, I just wanted to flag for committee that that in the beginning of spring of 2022, we saw unprecedented water levels in Hay River. So I think the reality of the operation is being able to literally ebb and flow with the challenges of climate change, and being able to adapt the operation, yes, absolutely in north-south. And then, of course, the importance of that shipyard in Hay River is really an anchor point at this point. But Inuvik and Tuktoy continue to be critical parts of the plans for 2024. But I just wanted to flag that, we have seen pretty drastic changes in that weather, as far as, being able to adapt the operation. Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Rogers, do you have anything further on that? Or another?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, just a quick follow-up, and I appreciate the answer, and Ms. St. Dennis is correct. It's been interesting the last few years, given that we've had barges not even getting into to at least one of the coastal communities, I think, at one point. So just a follow-up, you mentioned the scheduling this year. You're going to be utilizing the deeper water and trying to get your sailing dates a little earlier. Just making sure that that's communicated to the folks in the coastal communities to ensure that they're not missing cutoffs, and they know that if the cutoff dates to have their any equipment or any building materials and things like that are being ordered, delivered in time to make the barge, to make sure that communication is done early and often, I would say. Thank you.
The Minister, just either to acknowledge that or acknowledge what they're doing, just to ensure that. Thank you. Minister, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Chair, I totally agree. I wasn't the Minister of Infrastructure when there was a challenge getting into Qualitek, but I do remember it well. I think it was Qualitek, and I actually was the Minister of Finance, so I'm well aware of the costs that are incurred when we can't get into communities and the impact to those communities, not only to us, but to the community members and what that does, and then to try to support them. It's not a situation that I certainly want to see, and if moving our dates up early will only work if those who are putting the cargo on the ships are aware in time to be able to make their own plans. Otherwise, none of this is going to be effective. So, there's a lot to come on the review. But as far as right now, certainly I will say that a priority on my end is to ensure that we are getting that communication out as early as possible, that there's clarity of communication about the timing. And if there's been any delay between the NWTAC's meeting, when I think that commitment was made, to now, is to make sure that the communications are clear, and that all of the information goes out at once. because I also don't want to be in a situation where, one community hears one thing, the next community hears another thing, the next community hears another thing. So we just want to make sure that we have a clear communication of exactly which communities, what dates, and what that plan is. But I'm hopeful and frankly expecting that their letters should be out by next week or immediately thereafter. So let's say by the end of the month, folks should expect to have that information in their hands for committee, but also to regional communities and governments. Thank you.
And if you could keep committee informed with respect to that, that'd be great. All right, I'm going to go back to Mr. McNeely. I do have a bunch of questions, but I'll wait till the very, very end. Some of them have already been answered through process and questions. And my understanding is the members online don't have any further questions, and they can let us know through working with the clerks so we can return to them. And lastly, my understanding is the minister, I believe, would like to leave around 10:30, which is about 20 minutes from now, if possible. I mean, we can keep her if necessary, but I think we can issue a warrant or something. I'm kidding, in all fairness. So I'll save my questions to the very end. I'll return to Mr. McNeely. Maybe what we can do is sort of do a bullet question, because I know he's got a few, so we don't have, I'm not going to limit to one, considering he's the only person on the list.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. My next question is, during my presence in the 18th Assembly, we as the government at the time secured $22 million to expand the tank farm up in the coastal community. I believe it was Tuktoyaktuk, to bring that fuel capacity storage closer to the customer, and the customer being those coastal communities, the Sax Harbor and Uluktuk, and I forget the other one there. But anyways, is that 22 million plus our 7 million with it for a total of 29 million, I think it was at the time? Is that money still there, and is it still the plan to expand the tank storage capacity in Tuk? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. When I'm in, we'll rapid fire them through just to get them all out. Assistant Deputy Minister, please.
To the MLA's question, we actually currently have an application with the federal government to increase storage for the Inuvialuit settlement regions. We had a previous application in prior to COVID, but unfortunately the pricing and the amount of funds that were matched up did not match. So we've resubmitted. We're waiting to hear about the next intake, and we have a few communities, including Tuktoyaktuk, that actually are on our plans to apply for additional storage. Right now, the current application is to deal with the immediate need in Uluktuk, Paulatuk, and Sax Harbor. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Anything further, Mr. McNeely?
Yes, Mr. Chair, that still doesn't answer my question. My question is the 22 million federal contribution there. You're making it sound like it's not there, but we're going to reapply because inflationary costs went up. Well, I'm guessing the question or the process, if you got 22 million and your actual new cost is going up to 30, then you got to apply for 8. So is the 22 million there? Yes or no?
Minister, if you would, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I obviously wasn't here in the 18th Assembly, nor is ADM St. Dennis. So let me take this away and see if I can track down what this 22 million is. It's not ringing a bell, to be quite frank with me, as to where that might be or what that was or what it was committed to. So I will try to track it down. If it's not clear to me what it is, I'll come back and I can either ask through committee or to Mr. McNeely directly to figure out, just to make sure that I'm looking for the right commitment, and then I can provide an update as to committee as to what was there, what was planned, and what we are now doing. It may even be that we're not even talking about the same apples and apples, but I'll try and endeavor to figure this out.
Committee looks forward to seeing that. Anything further, Mr. McNeely, in our rapid fire session? Thank you. Thank you for that. I have a few questions of my own, and I'll just sort of do that on a rapid fire sense. Maybe I'll follow up on the last question with respect to fuel life. If we expand the fuel capacity in the sense of the tanks, which is fine on one side of the question, is how do we manage fuel life? Because I mean, fuel only has a certain expectation, you know, depending on what grade and what it's used for. So any comment, Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I learned a lot about this when we were doing the rules resupply this last winter season, but details on that let me turn to the Assistant Deputy Minister.
Just looking for the hand signal. Assistant Deputy Minister, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Fuel Services Division has key staff that constantly monitor fuel levels in communities, and there is testing that's being done. They actually are modeling the storage to ensure that if there is 2 seasons, that there wouldn't be an issue around those holding periods, and as well there would be testing that would happen as well. But it is something that the staff do keep in mind when they're doing planning, so thank you.
Thank you. I'm by no means an expert, but I'm well aware that degradation of fuel over a period of time, how it comes up and whatnot. But that said, if we have people who know that, that's all I'm worried about. And if that's their job. With respect to barges, can you reaffirm how many barges we have in the fleet again? Just to clear just the number. And the reason I'm asking is the next question is how many single and how many double hull barges do we have in the system, if it's possible? Looking for a volunteer. Oh, Assistant Deputy Minister.
Sorry, thank you, Mr. Chair. In the inventory that we currently have with MTS, I am just rushing to find my background notes, but as I understand it, we've got 35 barges in class, and 4 of them are 3500 series, 2 of them are Dacho, 1 is a 1500. The plan would be to have 9 double-hulled barges in the fleet. We currently have 7.
So simple math backwards means approximately 28 would be single hull, if I understand that. I was kind of confused how the numbers went on that particular one. Maybe I'll go back to the Assistant Deputy Minister. If we have 35 in the fleet, 7 we're working towards, or we'll have, I'm just doing my math backwards, I'll go to Assistant Deputy Minister to reaffirm that's clear.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Some of the barges are used for moving fuel. Some of the barges are used for moving cargo. What we have done in the past is we have double hull barges that have been created from using single hull. The challenge with doing that, though, is they become heavier and we can't carry as much fuel, but there are different uses for those barges.
Fair enough. Okay, so in other words, a single hull barge can carry other things without any concerns of risk, obviously. Okay, just to close the loop on that. Got it. Okay, so I think you sort of answered Mr. Rogers' question regarding finding a way to, say, utilize the top and the bottom of the Mackenzie. But I would like to say that maybe what we'll do is probably want to revisit that discussion, given the ramparts noted by the director and, of course, the flooding noted by the Assistant Deputy Minister previously. It may make sense to have a conversation about that, but not today. With respect to risk, I had a couple of questions regarding risk. So, we're all well aware, although you're wearing your infrastructure hat, not carrying the, say, finance briefcase per se today, but when fuel couldn't get to the communities, it got me thinking about who's actually responsible to that. Now, at the end of the day, the GNWT is the backstop to a lot of these things, regardless whether we like it or not. But when you get supply risks, whether it's private cargo or other means, including fuel, who carries that particular risk, and how is that disposed of or addressed? Just looking for Minister.
Sure, let me take a run at it, but I heard a volunteer beside me, so I'll happily pass on. But I do want to just quickly lead off with saying that ultimately there's a shared risk. So I think people do think that the government of the Northwest Territories delivers all fuel to all communities. That obviously, as we heard with Sigachik, for example, is not the case. So MTS does some of the fuel resupply, Fuel Services Division does some of the fuel resupply. But even going up into the Sawtoo, Imperial Oil is responsible for their own resupply. We are contracted to support that. But as a result of all of that, there's a shared division of risk. So there's shared responsibility between private entities as well as DNWT. That said, as I think, Mr. Chair, you were already noting, at some point, the government will want to step in and to be monitoring to ensure that every community remains viable, frankly, and safe. And in that sense, there's a role overarching where the government of the Northwest Territories will continue to be putting out the scheduling, as I mentioned, monitoring the scheduling, liaising with Transport Canada about ensuring the police are so there's that element of work that happens, and that certainly does fall to us. But there's definitely shared risk in terms of cost, for instance, and the winter resupply for Norman Wells is a good example of that, where there were clients of Imperial Oil, and therefore Imperial Oil had to step up and to support that effort for resupply. But I think there's, as I said, I had a volunteer to go into that more in depth. So.
Thank you, Minister. And just to reaffirm when I go to the director for the answer, some of it's about who's responsible ultimately. So if the fuel wasn't delivered or ProPack's projects weren't delivered, are we being, I don't want to use sued, but are we covering some of the delay costs? That's some of the risk detail. Director, if you could.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess just for context, I'm a marine lawyer by trade, so perhaps somewhat qualified to speak to risk. And kind of with specific reference to the commercial projects, because I played a large part in those, such as the ProPack contract, which you just mentioned. We do those in the marine industry, it's called a time charter basis. So our fundamental promise to ProPack is not to move their equipment from point A to point B. That would be a carriage contract. We're promising to provide them with our assets, so tugs and barges and qualified crew, for a specific duration of time. So we're like you can think of it, the land-based equivalent would be a taxi service versus a courier service. We're the taxi in this situation. We're saying we have equipment that you can hire on a daily rate, but ultimately the taxi company doesn't guarantee that the road between Hay River and here is passable. And the fundamental promise is the taxi company provides the equipment and you pay per mile. In our case, we provide the equipment and you pay per day. But the success or failure of whether or not the ProPack's equipment gets moved to the destination is on ProPack, not MTS. And our preference is to structure all of our non-core commercial contracts that way for the specific reason. It de-risks, it takes the risk out of the operation, because if we run into situations such as low water or ice or whatever other natural disaster may present itself, it's not a liability for MTS. It's ultimately a risk that the client carries. The opposite would be a courier company where the fundamental promise is to move your product from point A to point B. That's not how we structure our commercial contracts.
Thank you for that. I believe Mr. Rogers has an additional question. Either I caused one, or he came, or who knows why. I'll let Mr. Rogers. Are you there, Mr. Rogers?
I am. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick follow-up, and just a follow-up to my question earlier on we know we're going to be dealing with low water, and it looks like it's going to be a long-term problem. I know historically the river is opened quite a bit before the ice is off the lake. So basically the barges end up being locked in there until the ice is gone from the lake in order to be able to sail. Is that going to pose an issue with because obviously the river is at its highest point then, likely once the river is clear. Is that going to cause a problem with trying to take advantage of the high water levels in the river, given that the barges will still be in the lake?
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Assistant Deputy Minister, if you would help us with that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the MLA for the question. At this point in time, we're watching Mother Nature, and we'll be watching about how the melt is proceeding, but not getting any flags at this point in time about the issue that the MLA raises. But we will keep that in mind when we are having discussions with the Department of Environment and Climate Change on the follow-up on water levels. So thank you.
Thank you. Anything further, Mr. Rogers?
No, thank you. And listen, good luck to all. I have a little history with this, obviously, in a previous life with this company. And I know typically it's been about a month that they've been in there. The river's been open, the lake hasn't been. But yeah, no, good on you. And I know it's a challenge and I appreciate the update. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Just a couple of additional questions from myself. You mentioned the Coast Guard. So the Canadian Coast Guard, they'll be putting the buoys in. So I'm assuming, and this is where my first part of the question is, MTS cannot start its servicing until the buoys are put in. Is that clear, Minister?
Correct. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Sounds good. I just wanted to start it off that way, and I'm assuming it's mainly their responsibility. So with respect to earlier highlights about water modeling, I'm not going to get into that conversation that was already asked by MLA Reid. Sounds quite complicated, but it's probably ongoing every single day. But one of the interesting things brought up was the draft context of the barge is being changed. In other words, it's going to a shallower draft, hopefully more barges, and maybe we'll equate the same thing. And I suspect there'll be a cost reflected to that. I don't know. But I'm curious as to why a sooner beginning in the season has not been contemplated before. So, because that sort of dovetails into Mr. Rogers' question regarding ice flow. So in other words, the comparative example, and I'll come right back to it, is there was a time there was no, we're still in the genesis of the Aurora tourism. I mean, it's only been, say 30 years, but that said, it's still being developed and still being experimented in ways to find better ways to do things that are more applicable and appealable. That said, when Aurora tourism started in August, it almost seemed like a shock. It was a crazy idea, and then they realized how fantastic it is. So that said, I kind of wonder why the barging season was starting later in the season, and now we're talking about starting it sooner. So sometimes we know the risks, and that's really ultimately the question, which is what is the risk starting the season sooner with the water higher? Compound that risk with the ice flows and waiting for the Coast Guard. It just, the window, higher water sounds better, but the window of, sounds like it's adjusting to meet the needs. And I'm just curious on the risks we're taking on. I mean, sounds better to go with higher water. So I'll go to the Minister first. Okay, please.
Yeah, I mean, and I'll be brief. Alternative Assistant Deputy Minister, when I approached this, admittedly new to MTS, is to say, what do we do to prevent the situation that I walked into this last winter of having to resupply communities through winter roads and through flights of fuel, which was not a situation that was easy or, say, relaxing or comforting to anybody. So the idea of it, there's now been low water certainly last year, coupled with evacuations. So this is a solution that's been presented as to try to move it forward. So that continuous education, continuous learning of the problems as they are arising and as they are becoming, particularly with low water, more acute and more extreme. So as for any history, and to the extent we may or may not have it, Alternative Assistant Deputy Minister, we may need to get back to you with a bit of a background as to perhaps sailing seasons or why. But let me see if she has what she has on her history books.
Thank you, Minister. Assistant Deputy Minister, if you could help us. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Chair of the committee chair. I think fundamentally, the goal of starting as soon as we can corporately has been an approach. We've had the luxury of having water levels where you haven't had to have everything lined up so quickly because the water levels were going to be able to take you through to the middle of August. Because we realize that won't be a luxury this year, it really is getting all of our ducks literally lined up so that we're all ready to take advantage of what could be 4 or 6 weeks. It's not going to be 8 to 12. So I guess, it is a focus corporately to be ready to go, but really this year is making sure all the stars are aligned with the Coast Guard so that we are ready. So hopefully that helps. And if there is interest from committee, we can provide some historical information on start dates. But really it's about the lessons learned from last year and knocking on wood that we don't have the staff evacuated for 2 weeks in May. So thank you.
And just the last element before we go to Mr. McNeely is it was kind of missed, not necessarily on purpose, but it's also back to Mr. Rogers' question regarding the ice. So in other words, can we send assets up and down the river with ice flowing by? I'm not referring to the initial breakup, I'm referring to the irregularity of flows. Everyone keeps looking at the director. Assistant Deputy Minister Hewitt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate the comments, and absolutely, I mean, those are all the factors that are decided by timing of the Coast Guard getting the buoys out, and then us actually traversing the river. So noted, we will be keeping a close eye on the weather and the melt. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Mr. McNeely, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I share some TK knowledge here to give you an example. This is going to be a continuous problem, not only with climate change. When I seen the man-made islands being put in there in the early 80s in Norman Wells, and now on 2 islands you can walk across without getting your running shoes wet. That's how much sediment deposit comes down from the Liard into the Mackenzie. So the sandbars and the islands are shifting and changing all the time. So if those deposits were on the bottom end, downstream bottom end of these islands since 1985, when these islands were put in and the line was officially opened, what is our waterway going to look like with climate change and the drought season over and above the sediment deposit coming down from the Liard River within the next 5, 10, 15 years? So it's really something to keep in mind. So you've got hazardous points, and I'm glad the director brought it up, and Danny brought it up as well. You've got some hot points to navigate and bring to the attention of the captains. They probably know. You've got shallow spots there. Mills Lake is another one. The 2 sets of rapids between Good Hope and Norman Wells are there, and then you've got some other shallow spots there. So it's really a red flag to make this hazardous area aware to the sailing crew. So I know what my plan is there for the next 20 years or for this adaptation, and I think everybody would agree, to avoid flying fuel in, which is going to make it extraordinary to the cost of living, and at some point in time, if that continues to happen, the residents of the Sahtu will have no choice but to say, no, I can't afford your fuel anymore, so therefore I'm moving to Cochrane, Alberta. Simple. And you can solve that problem by building a highway. But it's unbelievable the amount of deposit below those islands, and it's a fact of life. You know, last winter, us river rats on the community, we looked forward to the firewood coming down the river. There was nothing. I too cut my wood there after bringing some logs into the shore and cutting them out there for winter heat. But there was nothing this year. Thank you.
More of a comment, anything from the minister, or no? Yes.
Only to say, Mr. Chair, I thought when I was hearing the comments that I was going to have this wonderful zinger of an answer to say, well, I understand there's a Mackenzie Valley Highway project, but I think Emily already took my response. So I predicted it.
I assume you're predicting the highway soon, too. I just have 2 other quick areas, and barring any other further urgent questions from members, then we will work towards closing the discussion up. The director had mentioned an additional tug in Hay River. He mentioned Kakiza. I didn't note the name. Even if it was mentioned, it doesn't really matter per se, but the name of the other tug and sort of the utilization of resources in that community. But I did hear the word new. I was pretty sure I heard the word new. And in the context of additional tug, did MTS buy another tug, or did they put one online that wasn't being used, or was it a redeployment of another service or equipment? In other words, just trying to curious on where it came from and how was it financially hit the bottom line. So I'll go to the director, please.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I'll start with by saying it's not a new tug. It's an old NTCL tug that it was sold off at some point during NTCL's tenure to a company called Fort Chip Marine, which operates in Lake Athabasca. MTS is in the process of effectively doing a swap with Fort Chip. We're selling a vessel that we have no need for to them, and we're purchasing the vessel. It's called the Marjorie, the tug that we're purchasing from Fort Chip Marine. That process is ongoing, but paperwork has been prepared by our lawyers, and we expect that deal to close, I would think, in the next few weeks to a month. I don't have the purchase price on hand. The Marjorie is worth more than the vessel we're selling, so it's a swap plus a payment. It's in the manner of about $500,000, I think, is what the payment is, but I don't have that number on hand. But that's effectively the story, and then the Marjorie will be brought in, and that will be dedicated to the dredging project. It's very similar to the Kiza. It's a much smaller tug than our mainline tugs. And then when the dredging project is done, it will provide redundancy in Bay River's arbor tug. Of course, our arbor tugs play a crucial role in the operation because without they're the ones that, when barges are being loaded, they can spin barges to the wharf and move assets around. And without them, the mainline tugs don't push or pull barges down the river. So that's the plan.
I have one other area, but I'm assuming you can sail, I guess that's the right term in this particular case, with tugs between the Chip Lake and Hay River, like through the water system. I don't know how does it get to Hay River? I guess that's ultimately the question. Maybe I'll let you be specific, Director.
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chair. It's already in Hay River. It's at the MTS shipyard as we speak, yes.
Convenient, okay. That said, just one other area, and again, once members urgently want to have another question, don't want to miss the opportunity. So we did hear about KPMG. They were selected. The review sounds like it's almost completed. It'll go to cabinet in advance of coming to the committee. I think I read somewhere in some comments that something to the range of August. It'll show up at committee or late summer, whatnot. I guess my question really specific to the KPMG, and it's no sense of speculating per se, but the sharing of the scope of the request on what they would review and analyze would be included in on that package of the review. The answer is only good as the question, I guess. I won't be cynical about question period, but that said, the answer really they're responding to is the question of what the proposal was about and how they were directed to review their scope. As mentioned by member Rogers, he had a question about splitting or Nuvik, and if that wasn't in the question, hence we won't see that in the review in theory. So at least gives us a better sense of what was asked, and when we read their response or their proposal or recommendations, we'll understand. Rather than saying, why didn't they look at this, or sorry, why didn't they answer this, because it was never the question. So maybe just to reaffirm that information will be included and will be transmitted to committee. I go to the minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I was quickly trying to see if I could pull it up. It would have been, when the procurement went out publicly, all the details and the request should be out there, so they should be public already if they can't be found easily. And actually, even regardless of that, we can certainly provide that to committee. Noting only that, as the director has noted, as the work has gone on and discussions have been had between the contractor and staff and community members, there may have been some evolution of what the work is that they're doing. But in terms of the starting point, that is public, and I'm happy to make sure that the committee has it in their hands.
And before I close, which I'm not seeing any going to the clerk, no further questions from members online, I probably would suggest that committee be invited sometime, maybe at the start of the season, maybe at the end of the season, formally, And that way, we can even extend it to Mr. Rogers, who's a committee member as an alternate, but we can coordinate in a way that it makes most functional sense. I think it would be good to see the assets talked to. I mean talk to staff privately just to clarify when I get to the next one, but to meet the staff, get to know some of the challenges they see and whatnot, and then we can understand, maybe a little better. So I would probably encourage the minister to go back and come and give some consideration to bringing a committee down, like I say, at the start of the season for launches, and certainly at the end of the season, maybe we can, sometime we'll figure out a window. But Minister, would you be agreeable to that and work with the committee? Minister?
Great idea. Thank you, Mr. Chair. We'll do that.
Thank you. All right. I'm not seeing any further questions from members. Sounds like we've got a bit of follow-up. I can ever so confidently speak for committee by saying I have no doubt we're going to talk about have a review on the KPMG report, so I can see that in our future. We'll wait for the answers to come back. That said, I asked the minister maybe one last time if she has any closing comments for the committee and the public hearing. Remember, we are live streaming, so if she has any closing comments before I close the hearing officially. So, Minister, any final thoughts or words?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have anything formally prepared, but do appreciate the discussion. Want to reiterate the commitments to safety, and I know our director spoke particularly to that about managing risk, both in terms of our contracts and to ensuring resupply, but then also in terms of ensuring that the barges and vessels are properly prepared to being on our waterways. But then also wanting to reassure people with respect to resupply and a lot of discussion that was had with ADM and all three of us here, and a commitment to making sure that we're getting information out to support good resupply. And so to the extent I do hope there are some community members and leadership listening, because I appreciate that it is very stressful when you don't know whether essential cargo fuel is coming into your community. So we do want to make sure, and I certainly want to make sure that those communications are had early and often. Thank you.
And as I close the hearing, I just want to say thank you for your time. Thank you to the staff for your information, and I appreciate the public, including the members who had to come in online. And I look forward to being in Hay River, meeting the people, the resources, and seeing assets in work and in preparation for the season. So thank you for that. And at this point, I'm now going to close the meeting and say thank you. It's now adjourned.